Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the virtual colloquium series in Conversation, Arts and Culture for Well-Being, organized by the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project at the University of Pennsylvania. My name is James Pawelski, and I'm Professor of Practice and Director of Education in the Positive Psychology Center at Penn, and the founding director of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to those who are joining us live and to those who are watching the recorded version of today's events. The mission of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project is to understand, assess, and advance the well-being benefits of engagement in arts and culture, focusing on individual and collective human flourishing. We are grateful for support from the Drew and H.J. Heinz II Charitable Trust and the National Endowment for the Arts, which has designated the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project as an NEA research lab and is supportive both of practice-informed research and research-informed practice in the arts, culture, and well-being. You can find out much more about the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, including our publications and how to sign up for our newsletter on our website at www.humanitiesandhumanflourishing.org. Thank you, Sarah, for putting that link in the chat. Today, we are thrilled to continue with our colloquium series, which features presentations by and discussions between scientists and practitioners on topics concerning the arts, culture, and well-being. Before we turn to our distinguished speakers for today, let me preview the plan for this colloquium. We will begin by hearing two 20-minute presentations, one focusing on science and one focusing on practice. Then I will moderate a brief discussion with the speakers before opening it up to a Q&A with all of you. At any point during the session, feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat. And if you would like to share these verbally, you can do so when we open it up for audience participation toward the end of our time together. And at that point, I'll invite you to raise your Zoom hand. And with that, let's turn to our speakers. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. Dr. Zorana Ivcevic Pringle is a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and the author of The Creativity Choice. Zorana studies the role of emotion, emotional intelligence, and self-regulation in creativity and well-being, as well as how to use the arts and art-related institutions to promote emotion and creativity skills. Her work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, ArtNet, US News, Education Week, Science Daily, El País, and others. And she is a regular contributor to Psychology Today and Creativity Post. Zorana can be found on Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Substack, and Instagram. Zorana, it is a real pleasure to have you with us today, and we will turn it over to you to look forward to what you will have to present to us.
Thank you very much. And let me start sharing my screen. There we go. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
We had some issues with technology earlier on, so I'm glad that it all works. Do you see it in the appropriate mode?
We do.
Great. Yes. Because for some reason on my side, it appears as presenter mode, which is definitely not my intention. But, you know, you have to love technology and be puzzled by it at all times. So I thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this event and your talk series. I want to talk to you about the creative process. And I love how your emphasis is on flourishing and well-being. And a lot of my work is, I'm primarily a creativity researcher, but I'm also studying creativity and emotions. And I thought this connection between creativity and emotions is a great fit when you are thinking about flourishing and ways to it. So as I start thinking about creativity and I started my career, I ran into a paper by Bob Sternberg in the early 2000s that said creativity is a decision. That was actually the title of the paper, and I became rather obsessed with it. It was a very interesting idea. I didn't quite know what it meant, but I wanted to understand it. And then a little bit later, I ran into somebody else who's completely different and who said something that sounds very different, but I think was actually getting to the same thing conceptually in a more abstract way. So Henri Matisse said creativity takes courage. And I think that these two ideas are related. You have to make a decision, you have to choose to engage in the creative process, but that is a deeply emotional choice, and there are risks involved in it, there are uncertainties involved in it. It is in many ways unpleasant, and it takes courage to get there and commit to it. So I think these two are inherently similar. Uh, and that has shaped my research practice for 25 years now. And today I want to get a little bit into three big questions. What gets us started even on the creative journey? What are those traits and attributes that are relevant for that first decision or that courageous thing that we embark on? Um, but then, okay, you have decided something, you have decided to get going, but you need to know how. You need some strategies, you need to figure out how to take the idea and then transform it into something concrete. So it's not just in the realm of fantasy or something you talk over coffee with a friend, but something that is developed. And finally, I'm interested in the question of when this can become sustainable and repeatable and reliable in the world. Uh, so start with that what question. So what influences the choice to do something with our idea? And there are two kinds of big influences, um, and they are related. Creativity is by definition related to uncertainty. We are doing something creative, therefore it has to be in one way or another original. We haven't done it before, it hasn't been done before. So there is no roadmap. You cannot follow a six-step program to get there, no matter how much the self-help literature is telling you you could. And they involve some risks. The first kind of risk is intellectual risk. Can I actually do this? Can I learn the things, figure things out on the way there? And that is what Pablo Picasso said, I think really beautifully. I'm always doing that, which I cannot do, in order that I may learn how to do it. And he made that as a daily practice. Most of us are not doing it as a daily practice of pushing ourselves to learn something every day. But it's the kind of challenge that is the intellectual risk-taking in creativity. And then the second kind of risk is reputational risk or social risk. When we are sharing an idea that is in some way original, we are standing out. And there are concerns how others will react. Will they think it is silly? Will they be angered? Will they think we are stepping on toes? These are all the things that come through people's minds. Uh, and these risks and uncertainties are related to creative confidence. In the world of research, we sometimes call it creative confidence, sometimes we call it creative self-efficacy. Creative self-efficacy is more specific to one particular task we are working on. Creative confidence is a little bit more general. And oftentimes people say, oh, I don't have confidence to engage in something creative. But I think that oftentimes this statement is really based on some assumptions people make. Assumption first that confidence is an either-or proposition. You have confidence or you do not have confidence. Really, it's a matter of degree. And it is a dynamic attribute. It is not something that you have it and then you have it in full at all times. You do not have doubts. You do not have ups and downs. It really changes throughout the process. A colleague in Mexico, Rogelio Puente Diaz, has studied people as they are working throughout the project that takes several months, and found that this confidence is the lowest at the very beginning. You are starting something new, you've never done it before, you have doubts, but it increases through time as you are making progress and as you observe your own behavior. You say, oh, I must be able to do it because I have already done something along the way. Um, I gave a talk about a year ago to a group of, I think there were 200 designers, and they were museum designers, they were experience designers, and I got the question of how to become doubt-free. And the honest answer is, and I think that we have a responsibility to give an honest answer, is that you are not going to be doubt-free. There is no such thing as being doubt-free. We are human, for one, but also the creative process is difficult and it's going to have ups and downs. And we are going to experience the creative block in one way or another, more severely or less severely. And there are going to be doubts. The good news is we can handle them. These are temporary, and remind yourself this is part of the process. It's not a sign. It's not diagnostic of your inability and a sign that you really cannot do it. So this is important to keep in mind when we think we don't have confidence. You have to start with some. Usually people have a difficult time starting with no confidence whatsoever. But remember, it doesn't have to be at 100%. You just have to make it to the next task and then refill on it and grow it. So let's say now you are managing, you are a little bit managing these feelings as you embark on the creative process. Well, what happens next? How do you make it through it and persist through the ups and downs of creative work? And there are ups and downs. So a while ago, I have recruited for a research study a group of creative professionals. They were artists of various kinds. They were composers, choreographers, designers, writers of fiction and nonfiction. And I asked them what happens emotionally during the daily work of making that idea happen. And this is what happens. Everything happens. um, Really, there was a lot of writing about creativity and emotions that stress the importance of positive, energized moods for the creative process. And in some ways, they are important, but they are largely important for that idea generation part. But creativity is not just idea generation. Creativity is also that daily work, oftentimes grind, to make it happen, and everything happens in that process. I also ask people what happens when you are experiencing a creative block, and I show this not because it's new or earth-shattering, but because the figure looks the way it does. So bear with me and indulge me. It looks like that. So it's frustration. It's overwhelming frustration. Everybody says it's frustrating. It just for different people, it is tinged with a disappointment. For others, with anxiety and doubt. For others, with annoyance. But that's probably related to personality. But it is something that is relatively universally experienced. I study emotions, and often when I start talking about emotions in the context of creativity, people immediately go to, well, we have to deal with emotions when they get in the way. And yes, sometimes we do, and I will talk about that. But that's not the only thing that is important, and that's not the only thing that happens emotional in the creative process. Um, Emotions are not good or bad. Uh, Emotion scientists consider emotions information. They are telling us something about the state of our mind. They are telling us something about the state of the world around us, our environment. And by skillfully reading that information, we can harness their power. We can gain information. We can use that information for decision making. We all know intuitively that when we are making a decision, we want to have more information. So if you make this connection that emotions are a kind of information, it becomes obvious that we can use it then for creative work too. So what does this very abstract term of using emotion really mean? Well, it means a few things. So I already mentioned emotions are information. If they are information, they can be helpful in making choices. They're going to tell us something. So to give you an example, frustration, we mentioned it before. Frustration is telling you something important and giving you very specific hints towards what you could be doing next. And frustration, if you are skillful at saying, oh, I'm frustrated, not just stressed, not just down, but frustrated, you know that you have encountered an obstacle. And what that tells you, the information encoded in that feeling is that, well, what you have been doing is not working. You need to try a new approach. There is a problem somewhere. You need to solve a problem, and you have to solve it in a different way. Another way we can use emotions is that there is a connection between emotions, different emotions, and different kinds of thinking. So I mentioned before, positive, energized moods are really good for quick bursts of brainstorming, coming up with ideas. If you have 3 or 4 minutes to come up with ideas, happy, energized moods are really going to help you there. Uh, but happy moods are not the only helpful ones. For example, I am not a morning person. I am really not a morning person. And I am quite down and gloomy in the morning. And it turns out you can use that too to your advantage. In those kinds of moods, people are better at critical thinking. So first thing in the morning, I review what I have written previously or what I have to find issues with, and it's a superpower of finding everything that is wrong. And that is also necessary in the creative process. And by using it, you are sort of optimizing what to do when, and that can make you more productive. They can also make progress better, and then your overall kind of uh, sense of what's going on more positive. So in using our emotions, we can make this match of a task to current mood so that that power of a particular mood is used to our advantage. Of course, there are times when we cannot do this, when you cannot choose that at a particular time you can do particular task. Maybe you're going into brainstorming meeting at a time when you're not feeling those high energized emotions. And so at those times, you have to find ways to generate emotions that are better for the task. Um, Scientists in their labs generate emotions by means of music or watching a little clip on your phone or recalling a personally meaningful memory. the feeling itself is not going to be as powerful as when we are naturally experiencing these feelings, but it's going to be close enough to get us through the task. But of course, sometimes our feelings really do get in our way in that traditional sense of, oh, emotions are not helpful for our thinking or work. And there, it is really helpful to, I think of this as if we are doing a super slow motion of the process, how emotions actually happen. It can seem experientially that something happens and then there is an emotion and nothing in between, but that's not really the case. There's much more happening. So, yes, there is an emotional experience starts with a triggering situation, and the nature of the situation influences our experience. But even if we are in the same situation, right, we've all been in a meeting where after a meeting, we talk to somebody and it seems that they've been in a totally different one because their impression of it is rather divergent from ours, because we usually pay attention to different aspects of a situation. But also, another influence on the nature of our emotional experience is how we interpret it. What are the meanings we attach to an experience? How do we explain it to ourselves? What is going on? So, a same event can be interpreted uh, as threatening or something that is a challenge that we can overcome, and that's going to have a consequence. And finally, we have a reaction, something behavioral, something in our physiological reaction, or something that we do either by facial expression or actual actions. And the process of regulating emotions, we can intervene, insert strategies at each of these stations. Um, and so we can lean into situations that are going to be optimal for us in some ways. Being scientists, I choose the kinds of things that I want to study, and they are going to result in more well-being on my end because there's interest, there's passion there. What aspects of the situation we pay attention to? Well, we can distract ourselves from some aspects and pay attention to others. That is a powerful strategy in the moment that can take the edge off from an experience until we can handle it in a different way. And then how do we interpret it? I love a study that I came across where people who had to do a public presentation to pitch their ideas to investors were taught to pay attention to that anxiety. It's pretty universal to have some anxiety before a public presentation. And that people have studied how they are interpreting that signal of anxiety. And those who interpreted it as this is anxiety because I really don't know whether this is going to work out, whether I'm going to be up to the task, had one kind of outcome, as you can imagine, than those who said, yes, I am anxious, but that is because I really, truly, deeply care about what will happen in this presentation, and I'm going to use all my preparation here. And finally, we can act on our reactions by influencing our physiological reaction, by taking a moment or taking a breath, for instance, and that is the least effective of all of them because an emotional reaction is already there in its full strength, but at times that is the only thing we can do. I am conscious that I am just about at time, so I will skip this part and get us to the conclusion and mention again, going back to that nature of the creative process when we are engaging deeply and getting started. We don't have to be natural risk takers or see risks, but we have to tolerate that uncertainty just enough to get us going. And creativity is not just about thinking. Our stereotypes about it talk about thinking, but emotions happen throughout the process, especially when we take it as doing something, realizing ideas. And these emotions can be harnessed and managed, which is the connector between creative process and well-being. There's always a social side. I did not talk about it, but that's kind of a little asterisk. And there I'm going to say thank you and invite questions.
Zorana, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I also appreciate you keeping an eye on the clock because I had totally lost the sense of time. I was so immersed in what you were saying that I could have listened for another, 20 minutes or an hour probably before I realized that where we were in the schedule of the session. So very grateful to you for that presentation. We'll look forward to some discussion about that. But next, I want to turn to our second speaker, and that is Anne Fullenkamp. So Anne is an associate of the American Association of Architects and lead AP, and the Senior Director of Creative Experiences at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. I think we should have met there today, Anne, but next best is to have you virtually with us. With nearly 25 years of experience in the design and architectural field, Anne oversees the permanent exhibits and collections, design consulting and traveling exhibitions program at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. In this role, she leads complex design teams consisting of artists, scientists, and researchers to develop innovative, interactive museum experiences that inspire joy, creativity, and curiosity for all learners. Since joining the museum in 2006, Anne has been a champion of the museum's play with real stuff design philosophy that advocates for authentic play experiences for informal learning environments and applying this approach to emerging research in kindness and empathy. In 2014, Anne was the lead designer for XOXO, an exhibit about love and forgiveness, which was a traveling exhibition designed to further the principles of love and forgiveness through interactive, hands-on experiences. Anne, we're delighted to have you with us. We'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here and share some things that we're doing at the museum with you. So I'm going to begin to share my screen. We're going to do this, share and play. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I do at the Children's Museum and really talk about art and making and the connection to emotional well-being. And so to get right in it, mentioned in the introduction that I am with the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. So, oh, actually, I'm probably, let's see, everyone's, there we go. So let's start here again with the play. Okay, there we go. So the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, to give you a little context, we are the largest cultural campus for children in the United States. And this is our campus. So we're in a really interesting place. We're in the north side of Pittsburgh, and our facility consists of a collection of historic buildings. We are in a historic post office that was built in 1893, and that's where the museum started in 1983. And then in 2004, we expanded into the former Science Center, the Buell Planetarium that was built in 1939, and then we built a link building that we called the Lantern Building in 2004. So that is now the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. And then in 2015, we restored the park that is our front door in front of the Children's Museum and created a green front lawn as an extension of the museum. And then in 2019, we moved into our neighboring Carnegie Library that was built in 1890. And we talk about all of this because it really lets us do what we do. So we see 300,000 visitors a year. We have 150 employees. Our campus now, we're as an institution, a little over 40 years old now. We're in 3 historic buildings, all in National Historic Registry. We have about 50,000 square feet of exhibit space, and we have 2 Pittsburgh public schools co-located in our buildings. And all of this is really important because of the work we do. We can really go beyond what a lot of people think a children's museum can do, and we are able to do some really interesting research about learning for multiple generations. So our mission at the museum is to provide innovative and inclusive museum experiences that inspire joy, creativity, curiosity, and kindness for all learners. And I don't know if many people are aware, but Fred Rogers is from Pittsburgh, and he was a big part of the founding of the Children's Museum in 1983 and continued to work with the museum until his passing. But we still follow his philosophy. And the main part of Fred Rogers that lives with us is his respect for children as people, as really intellectually curious and creative humans that we can all learn from. And one of the many quotes from Fred is about play. And here it is: play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning, but for children, play is serious learning, and play really is the work of childhood. And I like to talk about this because this kind of translates to who we are as a museum, and then our overall approach to art and making for all people. So here we are, a collecting art museum. We commission new works via residencies and capital projects. Some are hands-on interactives, some are public art pieces, and then some are pure sculpture and artworks. And then we also acquire new works by showcasing living artists and acquiring their pieces and inviting them back to the museum to show their process. So here are some pictures of an artist we worked with, Joan Danzinger. She creates sculptures with wire and glass, very industrial, quote unquote, dangerous materials. But we invited her, when we acquired her collection, we invited her to the museum to begin to share her process. And for us, a huge part of what we do is sharing an artist practice, and really getting people engaged in artists as people. Often when people go to art museums, there's that sometimes a disconnect and a feeling that that artists are others that have are creative and that you aren't creative. And that's a big part of who we are as a children's museum and as an art museum, is we want to make people feel like they can be creative too. And a big part of that is making sure people understand that artists are people like them. So these photos I just wanted to share, and I love because Joan, at the time when she was working with us, this is about 8 years ago, she was in her late 70s. And here you have some teenagers engaged with her, interested, sharing this experience with her, and finding that they have a lot in common. And this is probably a social interaction that wouldn't be common with these. They're probably, 15, 16-year-old kids getting to engage with this woman who has had a long and storied career, and then talking about her process and learning from her in a really interesting way. And then I love this, making these personal connections with people in the process really adds to the meaning of these experiences. And I love this picture because you see this little boy, he actually didn't believe that she made that. And that's what she's pointing to the wall. And then here he is, he ran over to the wall and pointed. She's like, you did this? So again, and then his father is looking on, thinking about art and making as this gateway for social interaction, and then really making everyone feel better throughout that process of social engagement. So in my introduction, I was mentioned this play with real stuff design philosophy. And what that means is we engage in an open-ended exploration of real tools, materials, and processes. Even if we're working with children or people who've never touched, been engaged in art and making before, we use the real tools and materials, and we trust people that they want to learn. So we find that that's the most effective way to get people engaged, is to use the real tools, materials, and processes. And then we've also observed that kids will almost always choose to be with adults and engage in adult experiences. I know there's a lot of feelings, or some children's museums kind of they're separate experiences for the children, and that they're facsimiles or made very safe, quote unquote. But for us, we know that children need to explore the world and learn real things. So here are examples of our clay programs, and they're using real clay. This isn't Play-Doh. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but we really, especially in the art and making world, really believe that using the real tools and materials are the most successful ways to get kids engaged. And then, frankly, you can see the look of joy on their faces, how much fun it is, and even that understanding that kids can have, that the adults really respect them. For us too, for many, many people, thinking back about creativity, most people don't think that they are creative or can be creative, especially once you've like become an adult. And if you aren't a creative professional or have ever considered yourself, that you've kind of let that part of yourself go. So that's a big part of what we do at the Children's Museum, was we find that parents, especially new parents, they're re-engaging with that awe and wonder alongside their own children, and can rediscover that untapped creativity. So again, having real tools and materials that everyone can enjoy together is really important. And then along those lines, really respecting people, individuals as experts in their own experiences really gives room for more authentic interactions. So this photograph is an example of a family. We've got a grandfather, his daughter, and his grandchildren, and he's leading. He is showing his grandson how to use the scissors, and he's cutting. Our staff is lightly facilitating, but again, being able to set up spaces where people can kind of have agency and take control over their family experience is really important too, because then these are the things that can extend beyond the visit to the museum and can continue at home. So to do this, we have an open access art studio. And we have 2 maker spaces where we investigate how the formal and informal learning practices merged. As I mentioned earlier, we have 2 schools. We have 2 pre-K classrooms in our Children's Museum building, and a middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade middle school, co-located in our library building. And they use our maker spaces and art studios as an extension of their school. And we really value the process over the product, and we encourage messing around. So, Zorana talked about creativity being painful and messy, and it is. One of the things we like to say at our museum and in museums is you can't fail museum. And we really make sure that we try to cultivate a space where you can test tools, materials, and try it out and make mistakes safely, and really use the process to learn and find your own path. And the other big part of what we do, and especially in Maker, and you'll see here, these 3 pictures all show maker spaces, but with different generations. So we have the parent and child, and that little girl in the upper left-hand corner, she's probably about 2.5, 3 years old. She's doing maker activities alongside the adults. And then we also work with youth and children in groups. So then you begin with Maker to gain a little bit of independence, where it might be staff facilitated, but you're really kind of beginning to explore on your own. And then we do a lot of work with adults. Again, thinking back to the creativity process and how many of us kind of disengage with that once we quote unquote grow up, or if even in school, if we've been told that we're not creative, if we're not on that path, we lose touch. So one thing we've been finding great success with is professional development, but really doing hands-on making and art with the adults. So why we think it's important to try. That's such a core part of who we are. It's making something tangible, really builds fine motor skills. And in building those fine motor skills, we do see that emotional satisfaction and a huge confidence boost. And this also, it builds social skills and also supports character development because, as Zorana mentioned, it doesn't always work out. You will fail. It's really risky. It's really scary. But when you do persevere and you learn something, even from your mistakes, it's a great confidence booster. And then also it's a great way to engage with others in a really important social context. And then, frankly, being creative makes us feel good. I mean, how many times, even in this mess, look at the smile on his face. And one of the things we find at the Children's Museum is, yes, you see this in small children and how brave and open to new experiences kids are. And then as we get older, our kind of emotional, self-conscious selves and egos start to take over, and we begin to lose that as we go along. And that's such a shame because look how much fun he's having. So how do we get people to engage in creative activities, especially when they've grown up and think that they aren't creative? We know fear is a huge barrier for adults who feel uncomfortable or hesitant to engage in creative activities. And frankly, we're seeing these challenges and these barriers appearing in kids younger and younger. It used to be like adolescence, but now, it is a shame that kids are growing up faster. So fear is a big factor. Feeling self-conscious. Nobody wants to be embarrassed or told that they're not creative or whatever they've done isn't good enough. So that's a big barrier to overcome. And frankly, sometimes it's just a lack of interest. They might not even know that they want to be creative or how a creative process could benefit them. So sometimes you just have to kind of, try something out just for the sake of it to see if someone will kind of begin to see the benefits of it. So there are also one of the ways we focus and try to find what's common and timeless across generations is communication. Frankly, we all human beings, all creatures, there are different ways to communicate, either through words, facial expressions, writing. So that's a way to engage something familiar. Our core emotions, we all have those in common. Depending on what we're feeling at any given time, that is a way to make connections. And the main thing and what I want to talk about now is the tactile activities and how making things, art or just maker, can really kind of begin to jump in and make those kind of core connections. So one activity we have is called Release the Negative. And this is where you write something on a piece of paper, and we often encourage people to write something that they're struggling with, and then you shred it. And this is something that, even though on the surface, it's not that you're making a beautiful painting or really worrying about what you're making, but you're actually making marks on a page and then have a physical outlet for it, and then thinking about what you can do next with those creative with the product. And we found this to be so successful, and people are just, you can see the smiles on the faces of these adults doing it too. That physical act of shredding is so satisfying. It gets people to re-engage and start drawing. And then another way is to give people just enough structure to help them ease into a creative activity. So an activity like this, there are pre-made shapes, but within those pre-made shapes, they can make anything. So again, if you're not a creative person, I don't know what to make. Well, don't worry about it. Just start playing around with these pieces and assembling them. And then you can kind of begin to tap into those dormant creative juices, and then maybe even begin to have conversations with people and then kind of get it going. So there's a way to kind of get people started on creative activities. And then again, giving people a little bit of structure. So this is an example of an art exhibit where we gave people prompts of the elements of art, and then this idea of opposites, and we gave them stencils, we gave them the set pieces, the square cards, and then even a format to display it on a gallery. So again, we were kind of getting them started on the answers, and then within that, they could be really creative. And again, this is something that can really be a tool to help people who don't normally think they're creative be more creative. And then one thing we found is when we work with teachers, frankly, if anybody is a teacher or knows how hard it is right now in the K through 12 world, and how teachers are just overwhelmed with professional development trainings and trainings that are often quite depressing and stressful. So we were doing a training and we bring out all the maker stuff, and we found the same kind of professional development training that could have been done as a lecture. When we bring out these pieces and parts and ask them to provide their ideas or have the discussion via this hands-on collaborative making, we got so much more positive response. There was more conversation, more engagement, and frankly, more laughter and fun. And here, this is a group of strangers. Again, a professional development seminar that could have been a PowerPoint in a lecture hall, but instead we broke them into groups, put the same questions and the discussion points in the context of making, and their conversations were much more lively and the results were very creative and fun. So we always want to start with the experience and remember that having fun and creating moments of joy, laughter, and chances to be silly is really good for everyone. Give people some basic tools. Again, if you're not an artist, if you're not creative, that's okay, because there's so many ways that you can present tools and materials to let people be creative without them having to start from scratch. And then really helping people feel they belong. So these are two activities. They're silhouette drawing activities. They're from our XOXO exhibit. But you can see here we have a grandfather and then a little girl who's probably about 4 and then an 8-year-old. And they're all engaged in the same activity and they're being creative and they're drawing, but they all feel like they can do this activity and participate together. And then sometimes it's just about touching materials. And even though you might not be making stuff, just getting your hands into something can be not only a mood enhancement, but then even kind of lay the groundwork for being more open to the idea of being creative. So we've done all of this. As I look at the time, I want to end with some work we've been doing with UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, behavioral health clinics. So we're really proud that we have built maker spaces with UPMC at their inpatient psychiatric units and at 2 outpatient units. And with this work, they have found that maker and having a creative outlet, in addition to art therapy, but now maker therapy, has had really tremendous positive outcome with patients. So I want to end things with a video of let the folks at UPMC speak to their experience.
It's an exciting day today. We're opening the 29th MAPS Makerspace here at UPMC Western Psychiatric Hospital. And we're excited because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we hope that by opening this space, it will bring awareness to the mental health population, and it'll help lessen the stigma of mental health. A MAPS Makerspace is a place where people of all ages can come to create, to make, in an environment that's judgment-free, a place where they can be themselves, where they can focus on science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
Here at the hospital, we have off-unit privileges. So something like our gym or our patio are things that the patients really look forward to. So whenever they get something as special as off-unit privileges, it really makes their day. This will be one of those spaces. This is a space where patients can come and safely express themselves however they feel in whatever moment. So it's going to be a beautiful place for them to come and just celebrate in their uniqueness and in their creativity.
I just would like to say a huge thank you to Noelle Conover, because she has been so generous and gracious to include Western Behavioral Health in their charitable giving. To see that behavioral health is part of that warm reception and that there are people in the community that recognize the value is tremendously important, both from our patient's perspective in terms of destigmatizing these conditions. And it's also really important from a staff perspective, because they see too the value that they bring to the table and that is recognized as valuable by our larger community. And I just can't express how meaningful that is, and we're truly appreciative.
What we do. Okay. So let me try to get out of this. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, we're really proud of the work with Matt's Makerspace because we are finding that through the active making, it really is breaking down barriers and making people feel better, which makes them more open to the behavioral health therapy. But we also see this with children, with families in the museum every day. So thank you. And I really look forward to this next discussion.
Wow, thank you so much, Anne. That was fantastic. I believe all the more now what I said at the beginning when I was introducing you. Too bad we're not actually meeting in that space because that certainly looked inviting and fun. But I guess the next best thing to do is to talk about that space and what some of the uh, experiences are of people who are actually in that space. So at this point, I'd like to invite both Zorana and Anne into conversation. And to begin with, Zorana, I'd just like to ask you, as you listen to Anne's presentation from the standpoint of a researcher, what is it that stood out to you that you thought was particularly interesting in what she had to say?
Oh, really, all of it. I could go on and on. But one thing that I noticed in her talk and then appeared in the questions, I think in a relevant way in the chat and relates to other work we are doing with the arts is the tactile experience, the activities that are embodied. In another line of work that we are doing right now, we are interested in how engagement with art as art reception, art appreciation can be stimulating creativity or inspiring creativity. And we are currently reviewing the literature, we are designing the studies, and one big lead in there is the embodied experience. So I really like to see that. I like that I've seen that embodied activity there as something that creates meaning because you're treating children, especially using real materials. You are treating children with respect. They are not doing a kiddie activity. They are doing something that is real, and they feel different about that. And then they are fully experiencing it. So that was very intriguing to me.
Fantastic. I agree that. So, Anne, can you talk to us a little bit more about that, the role of embodiment and how you see when people engage their bodies, more of themselves into the process, what effect does that have on their creativity, on their emotion, on their relation to others, on their productivity?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, again, my background is in architecture, so everything I've learned happily in my 18 years here at the museum has been through observation at the museum. And that for us, and what we've really observed is that if you can kind of break down the barriers, especially about art and creativity and those expectations that I can draw, I can't draw, or whatever, and just get people to do something, then that kind of mind-body experience takes over and they just start, they relax and they just start having fun. And I think that's one of the things that we're able to see here and really kind of do some research and observations around is when parents come to a children's museum, it's often with their first child and they're focused on their child and watching their child learn and explore the world in such an open and free way and experience everything for the first time. But in the most like creative and interesting ways. And then that's where you get the adults kind of re-engaged and just relaxed to play with them. And then when you have that relaxation, then they're more present in the moment too, and really paying attention to what if they're paying attention, if they're with their child, they're more in tune with their emotions and their feelings and paying attention to what their child is doing. And it just kind of reconnects us to our humanity. We can kind of de-stress and take that away. And then hopefully they're not worrying about the product as much, but having the real stuff. I mean, I know we probably can all experience this. And there's, a landscape architect friend of mine was just talking about this recently about the emotional benefits we get from putting our hands in soil, that the real tactile materials, it does have this, and again, I'm not necessarily a scientist or researcher, but we just know instinctively it does make a difference. And people do know whether they're touching plastics or real materials. Not to say artists don't use these other manufactured materials, but I think that's where it really comes down to that relaxation, that kind of getting out of your head and just being in the moment of doing the thing. And I know people, it's just not unlike exercise and taking walks and just reconnecting on a human level with your space, being present, and then also really paying attention to the people you're with.
I love that, Anne. It makes me see even more depth in the Fred Rogers quote that you shared with us. He said, "Play really is the work of childhood." And when you first read that, I was thinking play is the work of childhood for children, which is certainly true. But your description makes me realize play is the work of childhood for the adults who care for them too, right? Because it's a way of inviting us as older, people into the kind of child's world, which tends, I think, oftentimes to be less fraught with concerns about, oh my goodness, if I put this brush on the paper, will I be judged?
Right.
I'm not Picasso. What am I doing with these things and so forth? So, Zorana, I'm curious if you could speak maybe a little bit to that, reframing, I guess, or reappraisal. What we tend to think in the art world as adults that, there's the reason why you do art is to be Picasso, is to be great. And, if you're not great, then you better leave this to others. And I think what Anne's work points out is that this is a birthright that we all have. Just the as you said, Zorana, the embodiment, the visceral connecting to different textures and things, and then the creativity. And it doesn't have to be a masterpiece as judged by some, group in Paris or something like that, right? It just has to be an authentic kind of connection and expression. So what does that do both to one's emotional state, or how can emotions help us to overcome some of those fears and anxieties of making that sometimes beset us as older adults?
I love that question because it connects to so much that is going on in creativity research. And you're totally right that if your model of art and artist is a Picasso, why would you ever try? I mean, we are clear we are not Picassos. The same thing is in any other domain. Like if you are a scientist, if you are not an Einstein or whatever, whoever the Einstein is and what you are doing, why try, right? But creativity is not just there, and creativity happens and is related to our well-being in very small ways too. So creativity scholars distinguish 4 levels of creativity, and that fourth one is, yes, the Picassos of the world. But we start with something we called mini-C creativity, and mini-C creativity is something that is personally meaningful, might not be meaningful even to anybody else. But it's something that happened, creative connection that happened in the learning process. I know when I was in school, I had to learn these long lists of Latin words, and I did not like it, and I didn't want to do it, but it had to be done. So I invented a way how I would do that was creative to me. Nobody taught it to me. I would. This is dating myself, of course. On a tape recorder, record myself saying it in one language, in the other language, play it back, test myself, right? And it is small, it is making your life better because you are learning something better and faster. You are also proud of yourself for having invented something. There's that component. Um, and things work. Also on the little c creativity level, that's things we do in everyday life. Pretty much everything little c we do in everyday life is related to our well-being one way or another. Like little interpersonal creativity, what we do to enrich our relationships, that is by definition going to increase our well-being, because relationships are number one thing in our well-being, in multiple kinds of well-being. And things that are contributing to our personal growth. Those are small. They might not require much skill, and it may be those things that, you know, what Anne was mentioning in her talk a lot about mood repair, emotion regulation. There's wonderful research by our colleague Jen Drake at CUNY showing how engaging in artistic activities, and doesn't matter how creative the product is, we are just about writing a paper on that right now. The outcome does not matter. So, and that process focus, it helps you feel less sad, feel less angry if you are experiencing those things, because it helps you distract and take the edge off.
Yeah, and to
Go ahead.
key off of that a little bit, it gives, we talk about agency, but so much for adults, especially in, you know, the world today, but it always is that lack of control and the anxiety and stress that feels, but within a maker context, a creative context, it gives you back a little bit of sense of controlling your world. And sometimes we just need that, even if it's folding a piece of paper or doing something simple and repetitive. But again, that subconscious mind-body connection and giving yourself a respite, and a way to of control and making clear decisions and agency over even your paper and what marks you make. But I think that's where we find that connection to, and what we hope at our children's museum and as an art museum, we want to kind of demystify and help people see that creativity, curiosity can have other benefits besides whatever formal traditional hangups we have about art, even if you don't like.
That's such an important point, Anne. So as you said, Zorana, process, and we tend to be focused so much on product. That's after all what art museums are about, we think. It's about a product that can be assessed, judged, valued, perhaps commodified. You can take a selfie of it and post it on your Instagram or whatever. So Anne, I wonder if you could say more. I love your pointing out, for example, that agency is something that can be expressed and cultivated through these making activities, and especially at times when we may feel like other aspects of our lives or our societies, are not under our control. This can be a way of cultivating really our mental well-being. I'm curious if you could just kind of build on that, and as you were listening to Zorana talking about, emotions in these various kinds of ways, what stood out to you or what stands out to you as some of the important connections between her work and yours?
Well, I was really or in Zorana, in your talk, really resonated with the struggle of creativity that sometimes, and again, and maybe in what I was just saying, that creativity is fun, but the work of being creative is often very fraught with failure, anxiety, pain. Even like as a profession, if I'm a creative professional, I live that every day, that anxiety and frustration and pain. And even we know this with tortured artists. I work with artists. It's not often a happy experience when they're in residence. So I really resonated with that and that aspect of the struggle. And I think for that, it's getting through it, the perseverance. It's really relating to the emotional, being able to manage your emotions so you can in a positive way, acknowledge that we are going to have difficulties and how you have to kind of persevere and get through it. So that was the something that really resonated with me, and especially at a children's museum. You know, we talk about the joys of childhood, but there's often crying. And actually at our museum, we were talking about if it would be fun to be here, but you would also hear a lot of crying and screaming. And childhood is tortured, and parents are struggling, and it isn't. There are a lot of tears. So knowing that that creativity process does and can bring happiness and joy and all these kind of the positive emotions, but that there's a lot of struggle with it, and that's real life. And that's kind of part of why whatever you can do to help manage that, whether it is exercise and physical activity, but these creative activities can be that form of a, a cognitive exercise, just like, we do this when you're supposed to challenge yourself and walk up that hill or whatever you're doing from a physical exercise. There's pain and struggle there. That's also true in the creative process.
Yeah, and I love what you were saying there when you have artists in residence, and that there's that struggle component, and we're talking about well-being, and it can sound confusing, like, okay, which is it? And the answer is both. It's actually both. Um, and I love when the answer is both. I actually think in psychology, the answer is usually both, which makes it wonderful as a psychologist. I have done a study a few years ago, inspired by some research that was done long ago in the 1960s, that was based on observations of creative individuals in different fields. And I have done a study of artists, professional artists, that we recruited through emailing faculty at art schools all over the United States. And we gave them a bunch of measures of psychological strengths and psychological vulnerabilities. So think of vulnerabilities as susceptibility to stress and to anxiety and to depression. And on the other side, you have these well-being related attributes like hope and personal growth and purpose and meaning. And what we found is that in the artist sample, compared to a sample of kind of general population who were not selected for being involved in the arts or doing something creative, it was more common to have both at the same time. Oftentimes we look at, is it well-being or is it vulnerability? But we rarely look at it as a pattern, as a profile of something that happens. Multiple things happen in our personality, right? We don't have just one attribute at a time. And it's more common in artists that they have both vulnerabilities and strengths.
That is really fascinating. I want to comment on that, but before I do, I just want to mention that we will now be opening up the conversation to anyone who would like to join. So if you have a comment or a question or a thought that you'd like to chime in with, please raise your Zoom hand and be a part of the conversation. Zorana, I think all of us were relieved when you showed that slide about frustration, because frustration is one of those things that does seem to accompany many creative activities, whether they're specifically making activities with our hands or not. And I think we oftentimes interpret frustration as being, clear indication that we have no business engaging in this activity that we're engaging in. Who are we trying to kid? And this is ridiculous. And so it's always reassuring to hear from people who are very successful in the creative world, and or people who are researchers in creativity, that frustration is a part of the human experience with these kinds of activities. And that doesn't mean anything, just in itself that you should stop, or this is, I like the way you put it, Zorana. It means what you're doing now isn't working, right? So try something else or keep at it for a little bit longer. Maybe it will. Like there are a lot of ways of being able to construe that other than I'm an idiot. Why am I even trying this?
Exactly. And with like with any other emotion, they are temporary. Get what it's telling you, try to act accordingly, but remember it is temporary.
Mm. So, Anne, one of the questions that's come in via the chat is about measurement. So, do you engage in qualitative or quantitative measurement of the impacts of these museum visits on individuals, children, or their parents or caregivers in your context?
Yeah, so we do, and I'm privileged at the Children's Museum. We have a learning and research department with learning scientists who get to work. We work side by side with. So over the years, we do qualitative studies and do, depending on the project, we'll do something very specific with our XOXO exhibit. For example, we did evaluation, a study for for 3 years where we did the research and learning team was part of the development process, and then we were able to evaluate and get data with families after for a full year after the exhibit and follow them. A big part of what we do actually in our daily practice at the museum and why we have a design team on staff and a research and learning team on staff is we're in a constant state of research and development and prototyping at the museum. And we really treat the museum as a living laboratory. So I mentioned we have the 2 schools. So especially our pre-K Head Start classrooms, they play in the museum every day. And those kids and the teachers, they participate in prototyping, research studies with us all the time. And so we're constantly kind of doing these observations in that kind of iterative process, because one thing that I found coming from a commercial design world to being on staff and being the owner operator, it's been the most humbling experience as a designer ever, because often designers, and it's no fault of their own, you design something, it's a product, a building, whatever, you move on and it's turned over to the owner or whatever. And then you never really, you might, if there's a huge problem, you'll find out and hear about the problem, but you'll never really see what it's like every day. And on the joys and the struggles of my life here is I can never get away from what I've done. I'm seeing the benefits and the struggles every day. So we're in this constant state of prototyping, observation, iteration. So yeah, so it's something that it's case by case. We're also we look at this project by project, depending on if there's a grant involved or what the specific topic is. Lately, for the last 5 years, we've been looking at kindness and social emotional learning deeper, and what those, we really kind of start to measure conversations, because that's one of the things we're really interested in, is how your in-person museum experience, can that carry over to home? Because you can have a great time here, but are you kind of taking those, what are those takeaways? So we try to measure that to a certain extent. And I know if anyone's interested, we do have from our learning and research department, we have a lot of some papers on Maker. We have we've been doing maker education and informal learning practices around making for 15 years now. So we actually we do have papers on the impact of making. So I'm happy to share those. And then we have more recently, we have studies on our XOXO work, the social emotional learning and kindness. So, but that's how we're able to do it, is we have an on-staff research and learning team.
Love it, love it. Thank you, Stacy, for that question. It's almost, Anne, as though you not only have a place where you invite people to be creative, but the organization itself is a creative organization with the testing and the prototyping and so forth. I love that. So if you have a question, feel free to, again, raise your Zoom hand or put your question in the chat, and we'll get us through as many as we can. I see that Jose has a couple of interesting questions in the chat. He's curious about both of you, what you think about what makes children so creative. Is it because they connect to unexpected things? And also, how can we as adults nurture our own inner children?
Well, I'll just say from a layman's point of view and then turn it to Zorana. I mean, especially early childhood, we're at that between the ages of 0 and by the time you go to school, that's where I kind of cut off, or you kind of become a different person. You would just have so much to learn. I mean, when we think about human beings and what we have to learn to do between the ages of 0 and 5, our brains, our bodies are just thirsty and need to know and learn everything. You're learning language, fine motor, gross motor skills. You're learning how to be in the world. We're learning to recognize facial expressions and communication. So from my perspective, it's so intuitive and natural to us just from a survival standpoint, but that early childhood, and one thing we've observed casually is by the time you're ready to go to school, we almost treat you like an adult, because once you're going to school, you kind of you can do a lot of things. You're capable of making choices, of making decisions, and obviously it goes by degree, but I think it's that pure just survival. We're learning, we're touching, and we're using, anybody who's seen a child, has children, you're using all of your senses. And I think that's where, unfortunately, as we get older, we just get more disconnected to those multisensory, where you're smell, touch, taste, sound, everything, and just taking in all that information.
To kind of continue on what Anne has said, what happens with young children is they are doing a lot of learning, and in that learning they are making lots of connections from their experience previously to new experiences, and how they are generalizing can be a form of creativity too. These are all those what I was mentioning earlier, forms of mini-C creativity. And to adults, because we don't always do that, and our learning is more limited to formal learning, that can be surprising, and it can feel magical and really inspirational. And we recognize it as creative in children, although we don't recognize necessarily when we do it as adults. And a lot of that happens with children. They are connecting this experience to something totally different. And that when we ask that question of how did they do this, it is usually because of that they are making these really remote connections. But another thing that happens with children is that they are, especially young children, they are not engaging in comparison with others. And that starts emerging in middle childhood. And when you start comparing to others, then you go, well, Johnny is better than me in this, and Emily is better than me on that. So now you're ranking yourself, and if you were saying, of course, you're creative at age 5 or 6, maybe you are going to say something different when you start comparing yourself to others. And that playfulness may be going away, and we can recognize playfulness as a form of creativity. And play in itself, especially pretend play, is a form of creativity appropriate for children and important for children. And in the American educational system, play is really minimal when you start school, because the school day is exceptionally long. I grew up in a different system, and in grades 1 through 4, you would be home by noon. And we didn't learn anything less. It's just done very differently and with the value of you have to have time for rest, you have to time for play and other activities of growing up that here does not happen. And then recesses are being cut at school. So then you come home from school and you have homework. It can be 5 o'clock or later that kids are only starting to have potentially any time to play. So we are seeing less and less of that just physically because of the other time demands. But I want to mention another thing too here. These are all the reasons why we seem to be perceiving and we are making these judgments of kids are exceptionally creative. But if we give creative thinking tests, standardized creative thinking tests to children of different ages, and then look through time, kids in different grade levels, we do not see creativity decreasing. Their capacity for creative thinking is actually going up. Because with more experience, with more learning, with developing other skills, capacity to engage in this more formal way is increasing and pretty steadily. This is not to deny these other aspects that may be decreasing, but the story is not a simple, this happens and creativity disappears. It can appear in some different ways. That does not mean we shouldn't be nurturing these ways of play and allowing kids to play because it does important things to them.
Terrific. Thank you, Zorana. We are quickly running out of time, unfortunately. There are a couple more questions hopefully we can get to. I'll ask one of you, Zorana, and then one of you. And we spoke about embodiment and the role of embodiment earlier. And Einar has an interesting question about beauty and the appreciation of beauty, whether in nature or art or human excellence. To what degree, Zorana, do you think this functions as a psychological mechanism that supports creativity in everyday life and artistic domains? Could it serve as a kind of cognitive emotional primer for idea generation, or even as a reflective process that deepens creative meaning making?
I love that question because we are in the middle of a project examining exactly this. So it is a very exciting question for me. I believe that this happens, but what happens cognitively as people are engaging with art, what understandings or insights they gain, and what skills get primed hasn't been studied as much as intuitively we think it should be, and it should have been. But we are doing it right now. Stay tuned, stay in touch, because I think that really does happen. We know from some research that has been done in the lab where people interact with pieces of visual art, and then they are asked to not just look at them, but reflect on them or try to copy the same piece. That these doing something, not just standing there, but doing something, is promoting creative thinking. So we know it from laboratory studies. We are now trying to take it a step further and looking at what other kinds of understandings and insights can happen, like thinking about your own identity or having insights about spiritual or existential issues and so on.
Thank you, Zorana. And the next question is for you. And in particular, when you are trying to make sure, you mentioned making the experiences as available as possible to different types of people, different age ranges, and so forth. And Marjorie is curious about specifically, how are you intentional about being inclusive for people with various disabilities, say mobility disabilities or sensory or intellectual disabilities?
So this is really an important focus of ours at the Children's Museum and even our learning research. We do this work, but one of the things that we embrace and we're continuing to study is this idea of universal design. It's where it takes the minimum standards of ADA from the physical standpoint, but we kind of really put the user at the centerpiece. So one of the key things that we focus on is flexibility. So that we can be we say flexible and responsive. So that if there are any physical barriers, that we provide as many options in the same space as we can, table height differences, variety of seating, and really thinking about our art studio and our makerspace specifically as really open and flexible, and that we can be very responsive, and having a variety of materials and tools at all in any given time. And then also just inherently, we are a hands-on museum. So we have artwork that you cannot touch, but it's okay to touch. So hopefully in our culture, we establish that, but we are actively a part of research around this idea of universal design, because one of the things, again, all the things I've learned as a designer here at the Children's Museum is that children don't go to children's museums without adults. And often, especially the younger the child, the more adults that are with them. So if you want a child, the 2-year-old, to have an experience, assume that they're going to be at least one, but maybe 3 or 4 adults with them. So making sure that we have that variety, that flexibility is really paramount. And then likewise on our programming side, we have great partners, and we do a lot of work in the community with kids and families on the autism spectrum. We work with our local School for the Blind, School for the Deaf, and that's our approach too, is making sure that we know we're not the experts in most things, but inviting the experts in to use our space. And that's where, when I started my presentation with our campus, we really look at ourselves as a community meeting space, and these were public buildings, so that we are currently taking care of them. So we try to invite others in the community, cultural organizations, community groups, whomever, to come in and use our space. And then that helps us learn how to make our experiences even more accessible.
Fantastic, Anne. And just as a quick follow-up from Olivia, she's wondering how you know what types of activities are more likely to be more effective with what kinds of, populations and persons. Do you have anything written up about that, or on your website, or any resources that she could turn to?
Yeah, we can share resources. We have a couple of, right now we have a grant called Noodle, which is about neurodivergent uh, visitors. And I think that's kind of the key, is we invite people in and we learn from them. It's the saying is that nothing, I don't know, it's nothing for us without it's an inclusion, where if you want people to come, you have to invite them in and then have them share what they need. And we try to do that, but we do. But yeah, currently I know we're all experiencing this in federal funding, but we still have a grant about we're working with neurodiverse learners. So we learn as we go. And again, going to that, speaking as a laboratory. So we're always learning and changing.
Fantastic, thank you. And Rebecca and Marjorie, almost at the very same time, put in the chat, nothing about us without
Thank you.
us.
Thank you. It was on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, and that brings us to the end of our time together. My goodness, the 90 minutes just went so quickly. Thanks to Zorana and Anne for joining us today and giving us such thoughtful presentations and insightful answers to our questions. To the audience, feel free to add any words of thanks you would like to in the chat as well as we wrap up. I'd also like to thank Catherine Cotter, our Associate Director of Research, and to Sarah Sidoti, Associate Director of Operations of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, for all of their work behind the scenes. And thanks to each one of you in the audience for joining us today. It has been great to have you with us. Appreciate your questions and comments. Our next In Conversation Colloquium session will start at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, May 15th. So next week, and we'll feature Dr. Megan Stutzman at Queen's University Belfast and Sarah Lavin, founder and director of the dance organization, Local Motion Project. For more information on this and other upcoming colloquium sessions, we invite you to to sign up for our free newsletter, which you can do by visiting our website. Thanks again, Sarah, for putting that link in the chat again. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks, everybody. Be well.